Now Fiddler. Puts on the step, goes right through, puts on the step again. Oh, goes Freddie. That was magnificent stuff. Well, they shall not bury them. Marshall skips away, Marshall's still going. Mullins opens up again. Oh, look at him go. He beats O'Davis on the outside.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Voluntary Tackle, the only NRL podcast prepared to connect an illegal elbow to the windpipe of the big issues. I'm your host, Eamon Brown, and today on the show we'll be discussing all of the big topics in the wonderful world of rugby league, including some of the new rule changes, the second team in Brizzy, and the rumours swirling around Cam Smith joining the Gold Coast Titans. We also speak with friend of the pod, Jaaarnis, about the clusterfuck that is the St George Illawarra Dragons. But first, I must welcome, I was going to call you both pundits or doyens, but to be honest with you, I don't know the difference between the two. Regardless, it's Media Watch Mario and Xander Risotto. Welcome to the pod, lads.
Good to be with you, mate. I'll take pundit. I could see a future in cable news for us.
Okay, I love it. Can someone define the difference between a pundit and a doyen?
Is it doyen a kind of boil?
I don't think so. I think that's...
So I only know what pundit means, is basically what I'm getting at.
Hello, listeners. We've all missed you. It's been a little while. It's been, by my count, probably 3 years since we've last recorded. Apologies for that. I've had to spend a lot of my free time whittling wood on the front porch just to let the time go by. I'm just trying to, I guess, forget about Donald Trump the best way I can. And to do that, I've found an old rocking chair out in the front of my house has served quite well. What have you guys been doing in the break? Anything interesting?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed a nice break over Christmas. I was planning to go see everybody. Of course, COVID hit and the Northern Beaches screwed us. Pack of wankers. Sorry, Manly. Yeah, other than that, mate, I generally took it easy.
Mario, do you get offended by that when someone has a go at the Northern Beaches? Obviously, you're a Manly fan, and from what I understand, you grew up on a small exclusive island just off the coast of the Northern Beaches.
Yes and no. Northern Beaches, there's certainly a lot of wankers in there, and the thing that offends me is when people consider people from Avalon as being part of the Northern Beaches. Anyone Beaches will tell you that everyone from Avalon, garbage. They're garbage.
I love it. See, Xander, there's always a group within the group, mate. That's the thing to learn, and it's tough to be a bigot today because you need that kind of nuance.
That's right. It's like, the way people from Coogee consider those from Maroubra, also trash.
Yeah, although it doesn't help when Souths move the boundary and hold a ticker tape parade throughout Coogee and Clovelly, which is clearly Eastern Suburbs territory. Big shout out to all the South fans and fuck you for 2014. I feel like I need to throw that in every episode, just a fuck you for 2014. Look, we're going to talk about rule changes first up, guys. And has there been too many rule changes in the last 2 seasons? We all love PVL, he's an innovator. But at this stage, it does sort of run the risk, doesn't it, in a couple of years' time where we won't recognise the game of rugby league anymore because we've really changed the fabric.
Yes and no. The fabric's kind of a myth because rugby league looks nothing like it did when it was first invented.
Well, it used to be in black and white, didn't it?
But what I do think that Peter V'landys is pretty much a dropkick, old school idiot that all the media want to get behind because that's what most of them are. That is agree with everything he says because he says the sort of shit that they like saying. He's just making up rules based on Daily Telegraph Twitter polls that had 57 people voted on them, and he thinks, oh, cool, look what the fans want, let's change.
Well, he has said that. He's been on the record. You've got to give the customers what they want. But, lads, I have to have a question here. Is 2 points for a field goal outside of the 40-metre line truly what the fans want? And 2, what the fuck is with that rule change? Because that wasn't on anyone's radar, was it?
Yeah, that really came from left field. Like to be honest, I kind of thought that a field goal you could probably make 2 points anyway. But if you did do that, you should probably make tries 5 points.
But what's the purpose of all this?
Well, I mean, it just means that you can level a penalty with a field goal, and which I kind of get. I mean, a field goal is a lot harder to get than a penalty. So in a certain sense, I see the value in that. Just that I also think that if you're going to do that, you should probably reduce the relative value of goals altogether by just adding a point to tries.
See, I feel like that one rule change has already kicked off something in your mind where now it's like the dominoes have fallen and you changed another 8 rules. See,
Well,
this is
it's
the
one more rule.
Yeah, but this is the thing. And then once that happens, people will go, yeah, of course, we want scrums to be worth 9 points because we need to level 8 penalties minus a field goal.
I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen.
Well, I'm just saying.
But no, I mean,
you don't want to make this thing so reductive that we're doing year 9 maths.
Yeah, no, I mean, my point is that, like, I actually think my issue with it is more the 40-metre thing. I actually reckon that as a rule, the way penalty goals can be issued in a tight game, it's frustrating to me because it seems like sometimes the referee will be a little bit more cautious about issuing, or they'll do square ups. Whereas if you've got that option and it's a 2-point ball game where you can level it with a field goal, I do think it should be open to teams. And I understand why they don't want to make it about field goals, but at the same time, I feel like the weighting for penalties is being worth twice as much doesn't make sense to me.
Well, here's the bit that I struggle with. Peter Volandis said, the reason we want this rule to go ahead is because we want teams to be attacking right up until the 80th minute. And I don't know if I'm just denser than a whale omelette, but how the fuck does that make it more attacking? Isn't it just going to lead to teams, taking snapshots all the time because they're now worth 2 points?
Yeah, I mean...
And then under Xander's rule, you have to make tries 5 points for some reason. It's a clusterfuck.
It's about the relative value of scoring. But anyway, no, I mean, why 40 metres? That's my issue. I think because it doesn't account for the skill level, right? I mean, it's harder to kick a field goal from the sideline from 30 out than it is from right in front from 40.
Correct.
So it doesn't really track logically for me.
Okay, how about this? If you can nail one from 70 out, you win the game at any point during the game. So second minute, if you can do it, you've won the game, they call time off, well done, you get the competition points.
There's a good solution to what Xander's saying is if it kicks are harder from different angles, then it needs to just basically look like a basketball court and have a circle, a field goal circle. So you kick anywhere from outside that circle, and there you go, you're perfectly fine. You might be only 20 metres out, but you're from a diagonal.
I feel as though we're only a whisker away now from earning 3 points for rubbing your left nut against the upright. You know what I mean? I feel like we're getting into really weird territory. And do you think...
Be a great multi, though, that.
I'll be a hell of a multi. I'd bet on that. I'd definitely bet on that.
Like Xander's taking us to rugby with 5-point tries, increased points for field goals, clearly where he's trying to get us.
So I've always thought that Xander might be the Manchurian candidate of the Rugby League podcast world. His ultimate end is to be a bit like the Homeland character where he converts every podcast to rugby union. You've done a very good job. You're very surreptitious.
See, it's interesting. I want this to be balanced on both sides, actually, because over there I think that they should reduce their field goals and penalties from 3 to 2.
See what he's doing, Mario? He's already doing it. He's already doing it. We're talking about rugby now.
Both codes, all kicks should be 2 points.
I say no tries, just field goals.
But tries are worth more, so they're still attractive.
Yeah, but they don't exist on the...
Maybe make them 6 points or 8 points. Then if we make them 8 points, then all kicks can be 1 point because the relative value will be a quarter.
You've already lost me. Where was the where was the Q brute of, I don't know, Glenn Maxwell? That's not a euphemism, by the way, for Maxwell having an orgy. That's not what I was doing or attempting to go through. Sorry, yeah, go for it, Mario.
You mentioned, well, actually 2 things. One, if you're going to quote Blackadder, Eamon, please do it properly, don't misquote it. 2, what is the incentive for teams to put up the Mitch Moses 40-metre midfield bombs on the last tackle of a set? Why not just go for a field goal every single time? It's effectively the same result, but you might get 2 points.
Totally agree. I just feel like this was the solution to a problem that no one posed. And I'm wondering if just one night PVL just hacked into the Dulux paint and decided I'm going to give that a bit of a whiff and come up with 9 new ideas tonight. And this is one of them. Can we put a big red pen through it? Are we all just like, fuck this one off?
Almost. I will just counter Mario what he's just said briefly. I mean, the
is
obvious
about Blackadder.
The obvious. Yeah, well, no, he's right about Blackadder. You're
Sorry
wrong.
about that.
The obvious counter to that point is that teams aren't going to do that because if you're going for a field goal, you're kicking long, and even 40 metres out, you're a fair chance of creating a 7-tackle repeat set. So the incentive structure is still different, but I agree with you, both of your fundamental points that 40 metres doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Well, I always come back to this, though, as a basic viewing standpoint. No one wants to watch players and teams go at it with field goals. They want to watch tries, right? That's kind of the ultimate thing we're trying to incentivise. And it just seems odd to me to increase it by 2 points. But we're not going to dwell on it because, believe it or not, there's 18 new proposed rules for 2021, and this is just the first one. The next one is a 6 again for 10-metre infringements and professional fouls in the ruck. Now, we've seen the 6 again last year. Personally, I was a bit of a fan of it. I quite liked it. Do you think we're taking the 6 again too far by extending it to 10-metre infringements and as well?
I'm a little concerned because I got the feeling last year that those 6 agains, they in a certain way they made the game feel a little bit more like AFL, where it was really momentum based. You get a roll on, and the referees, the statistics of it probably will have its own story to tell. But I kind of felt like they would rule successively for one team as well. And you could just have, like, the possession stats just felt like they were going a bit out of whack, and teams were just struggling to keep their head above water. So I don't know.
I agree with you. It did seem a bit more like AFL, but particularly when Mitch Pearce was playing and he kept kicking the ball dead outside of the sticks, which was weird. He was playing his own game, I think.
Especially when he took the ball and held it in the air and ran over the sideline. That was really silly.
And harassed a female in the crowd with it, which I hear allegedly. I don't know if he actually did that.
It's a dog.
By text, anyway. Mario, how do you feel about this one? I'm trying to remember what your opinions were last year about the 6 again rule. I sort of happen to remember you thinking you weren't a fan, but what are your thoughts on it?
I kind of liked it. I think I remember saying that I liked it at the start of the year, but God, who knows? I don't mind it for the 10 metres. For ruck infringements, it seems a little strange. Which ruck infringements is that a strip? Because if you've stripped the ball away from them, you can't just give them 6 again because you've taken the ball off them. So I'm just a little confused about where the lines are on those. Maybe it's just if it's convenient, then they'll make that rule.
I assume so, mate. I assume it has to be at times where there's been a foul committed in the ruck, but the other team hasn't come up with possession, because that would be weird to go give the ball back at 6 again. So I assume in those cases it's going to have to be a penalty. I for one, am also a fan of the 6 again. I felt like it did speed up the game, but I think we all made the criticism last year, and I think it's a fair one, that there's often, I guess from an audience point of view, you're not always sure what the penalty was given for. Yeah. And I've watched plenty of games of you, Xander, live, and part of it was always, oh, look, they've got 6 again. What was that for? I don't know. But there's no time to question it because we're now under the pump.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was a couple of games in particular where like, what was that for? I don't know. Well, anyway, they're on the roll.
Yeah. Is this a little way that referees have sort of gotten around the question of accountability because they realise there's not enough time for fans to dwell on decisions because it's happening so fast now?
They should at least have to yell out 6 again offside, 6 again infringement.
Yeah, why is that such a hard thing to do? I remember someone proposing that and everyone went, no, that won't work. It's happening too fast. Fuck off.
It's a whole other word to say.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, field goals are now 2 points. And if you score in the corner, that's 9 points. But it's divided by 3 if it's the eastern corner.
I have a better idea. I think what we really need is goalkeepers standing on the crossbar, and they're obviously allowed to dive side to side, use their hands to stop those field goals, but they have to stay balanced on that crossbar. Failure, basically a floor is lava situation. If they fall off, then it's death or something.
Fall is lava. I mean, fall is a fracture at that point. I think we should probably actually string them up. Like you ever seen people in those gyroscope things where they sort of like bounce off trampolines and they've got like cords attached to them both sides? I think put them on them, they can sort of fly up and down and whisk around. Then we're going real Blurns ball territory here. But
I mean, we laugh, but PVL's probably really working on that one right now. Handovers, guys, for incorrect play the balls. This is a weird one because how often is an incorrect play the ball really enforced? Unless some fuckwit absolutely gets confused and faces the exact wrong way 180 degrees, it virtually never gets pulled up, does it?
Yeah, I don't like this. It is one of those rulings that has the potential to just become a pedantic, occasionally raised momentum killer for one side. And if you go back and look through the tape, you'll be able to point to 15 examples that weren't pinged.
I was going to say, what constitutes an incorrect play the ball? Is it the fact that the stud of the boot doesn't come into contact with the ball at all? Because they attempted to enforce that about 15 years ago, and that was fucking horrible because there was about 98 penalties in the first 9 minutes.
Yeah, no, it was stupid. I think the simpler solution is to just do what they have done, and that is that, if you've done it wrong or played in the wrong spot, you just make them go back and they lose momentum.
I mean, this is going to be the I guess what teams are going to train for is how to game the system of the new set of rules. So for every new set of rules that the NRL brings in, there's a myriad of coaches who get together and go, well, how do we fuck these rules over? Big shout out to Craig Bellamy for ruining the game in the modern era. But
I hear he's already hired a consultant coach just for this purpose.
Yeah, I'm sure he has. And I think his consultant has several consultants. That's the way it works. It's a Ponzi scheme of people trying to fuck over the rules. This is a really...
That's not how Ponzi schemes work. Sorry, go on.
No.
I just wanted to point that out.
No, but it depends. It depends what you pay them. And then eventually someone gets left out of pocket.
Because a Ponzi scheme is effectively... look, I'm going to need more detail on that one offline.
Okay, no worries. I'll get
that doesn't make sense to me.
I'll get a Sharpie and a bit of butcher's paper and we'll go over it together.
For that one.
No, this is an interesting one. Captain's challenges, when it's inconclusive, they're going to stand. I think last year when they brought it in for the first time, it was inconclusive. The captain lost the challenge, which actually makes sense, right? That's a bit of a tough call when the video ref can't tell and you've lost your challenge.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, we're supporting some of these rule changes. This is interesting.
I like it.
Thought I was going to shit on all of them.
Now, this is the one that I've never been a big fan of. I think it's this one. I'm reading it live. Bunker reviews done in the background after an on-field try is awarded, with conversion attempt not permitted until the bunker is satisfied with the try's outcome. Now, for me, this is a weird one because I've seen it trialled, and what it results in is teams celebrating. They've scored the try. It looks legitimate. So at home, if you're supporting that team, you're celebrating with them. And the guy's lining up the kick, and then someone walks across really awkwardly, like the ref, and goes, "Sorry, mate, that's actually a no try. We've looked at that, and it's going to be a 20-metre tap." And it just is so deflating. That's the thing in terms of the theatre of rugby league, I remember thinking that's just a fucking bad rule.
Maybe I'm just taking my basketball opinions to the rugby league, and maybe they don't relate because there's a lot more scoring occasions in basketball, but it's pretty normal there. Someone scores a basket, they think it's 3. Oh wait, that's only 2. Oh wait, we're going to review that. Oh no, you've travelled, you've charged, whatever, and people then just get on with it. But yeah, you're scoring 200 points in basketball as opposed to 50 in rugby league. So
yep. I think that's the big difference for me. I can see that when point scoring is so routine as it is in basketball, I can kind of see the merit of it. But, you can go 70 minutes without someone scoring a try in rugby league. So when someone scores, it's quite a big moment. And to have that moment trampled upon by a referee who sort of ambles across awkwardly and says, "No, you fucked up there," I'm not a fan of this one.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about this before the end of the year. And I
have a memory like a sieve. I don't remember any of that.
I did mention that they'd been doing this in union, and it was annoying me. They did a less smart version of though in union where they allowed teams to game the system where if you managed to kick your conversion before the referee had ruled on it, it was official, regardless of what the video referee said. So occasionally you get sides who'd score a try and the on-field ref would do it, and because they'd be right in front, they'd just take a quick snap field goal, because you can take a snap like a field goal conversion.
Why are we turning sport into a bad Benny Hill sketch? Like, why are we hoping to develop tactics where a team will rush back and try to kick a conversion in under 2 or 3 seconds just to get away with something?
Yeah,
it's an unusual precedent, isn't it? To set
that was one of the weirder things that they came up with. But in the NRL, when they did it last year, I was kind of in two minds about it because they'd not gone quite that silly with the way that they'd structured it. They made you wait for the field goal for the conversion, but simultaneously, I also find the 15-minute review of multiple angles of what seem like really obvious tries really irritating. So part of me kind of wants that to go away and to not see it, and then maybe just have them pad out the time until they get to the conversion. So, because I get really angry watching them review stupid obvious tries. Yeah. So I'm kind of in two minds about it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Look, this wasn't part of what we were going to do, but if you guys, that's a big set of rules. We've sort of exhausted them. If you guys had to implement a rule, is there one that you think the NRL needs to look at or should implement? So let's go to the brains trust of the TVT.
2050s.
2050s. Now, we've chatted about this, and I think there's merit in not even having 20 anything or 40 anything, but just going, if you've kicked the ball
If you kick
more
it
than
so many pains, yeah.
yeah, like maybe it's like 30 metres.
Yeah.
No matter where you are on the field, if you're kicking more than 30 metres and it goes into touch, you get the ball back. I actually quite like that.
I think the challenge is from an officiating standpoint, like for the referees, they've got the 2 red lines now that they can use to adjudicate.
That is true. It is a bit of fly in the ointment actually adjudicating on them. But
So once we've got an AI that can work that out on the fly, I'm sure it'll be all right. But
yeah.
then you won't even need the lines.
Another rule that I've been stewing on, Shane Webke has to play a wing in every match in the round. Welcome back to the Voluntary Tackle. We're talking expansion, and in typical rugby league style, the NRL's deciding to expand by one team to make it the odd number of 17 teams. PVL's pretty certain about this, lads. He wants, I think it's 2023, he wants a second team in Brisbane. It actually makes a lot of commercial sense. There looks like there's 3 bids now that it's down to. There was about 19. Remember the Leprechauns? God bless them, the Brisbane Leprechauns. They've fallen by the wayside, Xander. They're gone now, much like most of Ireland. COVID, it's so racked over there. But now there's 3 bids. So you've got the merger now between the Bombers and the Ipswich Jets. So that's the Brisbane Jets bid. You've got the Eastern Suburbs Tigers, which I believe is the Firehawks. And the third one is the Redcliffe Dolphins, which is a bit of a smoky and a bit of an outsider. So it's come down to 3. Before we dive in and have a look at some of these bids in more detail, putting a little asterisk there because we may not be able to find any live, I want to know from you guys, which of those 3 bids seems the most attractive to you?
Purely practically, it's probably going to be the Jets. Just because they've got the money. They're both pretty. I mean, the sort of appeal of the Dolphins was Redcliffe has all that infrastructure. The Bombers kind of solved that by partnering up with Ipswich. Again, established identity. They did pretty well in the local competitions for a while there. I don't know if they're quite as moneyed as the Dolphins, but it makes them both fairly attractive looking.
The good thing about the Ipswich Jets too, which is now the Brisbane Jets, obviously you've got the resources of 2 bids that have essentially consolidated. But from what I saw, it made the most sense in terms of the population arc as well, Ipswich, that western corridor, quite a built-up area. I think it has a fairly defined character where they won't all necessarily be major Brisbane fans. I think they would want to come along with the journey and be, I guess, an opposite or an alternative team in Brisbane to Brisbane Broncos, which is important as well. And they've got a lot of, I guess, a track record of success. And look, we're just reading live, so thanks for keeping up with us, listeners. But according to Sporting News, which isn't always a Bible when it comes to rugby league authenticity, the Brisbane Jet expansion bid is actually actively targeting Cameron Munster and Harry Grant. So they're really going after the Melbourne Storm stocks in the hope that, I think some of these guys will be coming off contract in a couple of years. So many rumours swirling about what this inception team will involve. There's a lot of, it's going to be Craig Bellamy, it's going to be Wayne Bennett, Cameron Smith, who we're going to get to in a moment, could well be in some form on the coaching staff, or he could be doing a Tom Brady. He could still be playing. So I want to start off with this question. I always find this an interesting one. Should a new franchise have its own identity, or would you see an advantage in actually having a pre-existing identity come along into first grade? So the examples would be the Firehawks, a brand new one, versus something like the Brisbane Jets. The Jets an accepted brand up there.
Well, I mean, the Firehawks are not entirely a new brand. They're basically East Tigers, really, aren't they? They're rebranded them, more or less.
Yeah, so new mascot. Yeah. Essentially, I'm assuming because we already have a Tigers, they've decided to pivot and go Firehawks.
That's right, and they've got, they went with, I think, orange and like navy or something like that.
The bastions of bushfires.
That's right.
Yeah. The patron saint of bushfires.
Very, very resourceful little fire starters. They're obviously sort of positives and drawbacks to both. I mean, with the established identity, you do have a core support that you can bring along, but you also have the fact that people who are part of that local competition won't want to support them. Are they inoffensive identities? Are they one of those people's favourites teams up there, or what?
This is the kind of stuff that's really surprised me. I've heard a lot of these bids talk, and I don't think they're all making up shit here. They've actually done a lot of studies about how many people who are active rugby league fans in Brisbane but aren't necessarily fans of the Brisbane Broncos, and they're the guys that the new bid is chasing, that they either have a legacy team that they follow in Sydney, or they like rugby league, but they've always hated the Broncos because it didn't represent them. So a new brand in Brisbane is sort of looking to galvanise this large collection of people who, according to these studies, and it's been multiple bids have come up with similar conclusions, there are a lot of people in Brisbane, and this really surprised me, who don't like the Broncos. Did that surprise any of you guys to learn that? For me, a one-club town, a one-club city, it always seemed like it would be a difficult proposition to transplant another team in there and get them to sort of defect from the Broncos.
No, I mean, if I've had mates who've lived up there for years, they've told me that forever. That there's always been, even from the start, there were people who were resistant to the idea of like that one, monolith side and wanted to stick to one of the old identities. But there's always been people who hate the local, the Broncos. Same in, it's not analogous, but there are people in Melbourne who hate the Storm.
Yeah.
Who like rugby league.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to be very isolated people because, rugby league's not a big game down there in Melbourne. And to hate the Storm, but like the game, I mean, you've almost got to be a schizophrenic.
But there is that, people who don't like the big dog. There is that mentality. They're like my older brother's one of them. He hates every team that tribally he should support.
Yeah,
like always.
Is that because he has a cultural chip on his shoulder?
I don't know what sort of a chip it is, but in the cricket, he would root against Australia because we were too successful. In State of Origin, he'd go for Queensland because he didn't, he didn't like the noise around the Blues and the Sydney press.
So, basically, what you're saying is your brother should be strung up and shot. But
there are people like that. I know a few who sort of fall to varying degrees in that category. Yeah. They're just iconoclasts.
So basically, you're saying a new team in Brisbane would have to be made up a supporter base of iconoclasts and traitors.
And people who don't like the Broncos just because they're a pack of News Limited scumbags.
Okay, well, that's a very pointed opinion. Mario, I need to bring you in here. You've been very quiet, and I think it's because you hate Brisbane. But the prospect of a second Brisbane team, does it excite you as a rugby league fan, mate?
Yes and no. What doesn't excite me is 17 teams. It's stupid. Just in the bin with 17 teams. I don't understand.
I agree.
Why we're intentionally
Totally agree.
Let's just have a Perth team, have a New Zealand team. I don't give a crap. Just have another team or ditch one. Kick bloody Souths out again, whatever.
Why does the NRL do this? Do you think? I completely get the economics of wanting another team in Brisbane. Makes total sense. I mean, the idea of the Brisbane rivalry alone, that's pretty salivating, isn't it? Even as a Sydney-based rugby league fan. Plus, I have a bit of a gland problem with my tongue. But for me, you'd want to be putting a double expansion in place because who the fuck likes a bye? The byes are the most deflating things to have ever been involved in rugby league. It's the equivalent of having a draw. I'm a pro Golden Point man because if you've ever been out to a game when there's been a draw, unless it gets you into a final series through some kind of weird act of mathematics, a fucking deflating result for everyone involved. Why does the NRL want just one extra team? I feel like if we're going to go down this track, we should be doing a double expansion.
Because you can add New Zealand or you can add Perth and you've got a useful time slot that they can add to the calendar each week. And that's it. Commercially, that makes sense, surely. Having a Perth time slot that's going to be getting people over there. And so, crazy people here can watch at 10:30 at night because there's plenty of them who want to do that. It makes such obvious sense. What are we really gaining by adding one team apart from, as you said, annoying buys?
I'll get to you in just a second, Xander, because I know you've got something to add to that. But I have heard PVL say a number of times that he is an expansionist, but with a fairly significant caveat, that being he doesn't have any interest whatsoever in going into what he labels rusted on AFL states. So if he's going to do any expansion, it would be, for example, Mario, in a New Zealand. For example, I can't see him going to WA and I can't see him going to South Australia either. Xander, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that could just be bluster. It could be a negotiating position he's putting forward to try and, push them to doing something. They're still taking games to WA. He's not stopping that, and he's not. I think that's.
Why would he come out and say that then? What's the advantage of optics of him saying, "Fuck WA and South Australia"?
Like I said, I reckon it's a negotiating thing. I mean, it's probably part of. There probably is a lot of interest, and they're looking for more. I mean, he's done this before with other things. But just getting back to the original point, the simple reason that you'd go for one team is purely because the playing pool just isn't there right now.
Yeah.
The bottom end of the table were abysmal last year. Like they were not first grade standard.
Yep.
So there's a fairly pragmatic argument that says that if you're going to expand, you have to really have that first team bedded down and given a chance to develop their own pathways first, so that you can then add another expansion team to bring it up to 18 sides without it just becoming a bit of a farce at the bottom end of the table.
Is the Melbourne Storm in 1998 a bit of a rejection of that theory, the idea that they didn't have juniors set up there. They were essentially transplanted there from Perth, and yet they have gone on to become arguably the most successful sporting franchise in Australia. Could it happen that way? Could we set up a Perth team called something like the Perth Pirates, and if the infrastructure and the organisation is set up correctly, they'll end up being a successful franchise anyway?
So no, the reason being is because
Thank you very much. Thought I'd throw that in there.
That is the reason being is like if you did everything absolutely right, sure, but three teams collapsed to form the basis of the Melbourne Storm when they were first born, and there was a lot of
shout out to the Hunter Mariners.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Great side. We should bring them back. But there was a lot that went into that, and the fact that they just happened to win the coaching lottery after their first couple of years when they signed Bellamy, in 2002.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Mark Murray.
But no, they were really lucky in '99, like ultimately. But it was they had a good mix of experience and people who'd been there and done that, and three teams collapsing, and then they just happened to sign one of the brightest young coaches at the time in Craig Bellamy.
Yep, and it was a great move to bribe Jamie Ainscough to fuck up that try at the end in 1999. That's a great move from an organisation which went on to prove that being really nefarious can bring you long-term success on the field. I'm going to put this out to you, Mario. I want to know, if you were bringing in an 18th team, so one in Brisbane, where would your 18th team be?
New York.
Okay, you can't just leave it at New York like you're a fucking Alicia Keys.
It's all about bums on seats. It's all about visibility for Mr. Volandis. I'm sure if you polled people in New York and asked them where the next team should be, they'd all say New York. And so therefore, there'd be more people voting on that than on the average NRL.com poll. So therefore, that's the right team, and shame on him for not making it happen yet.
So I'm going to be beating a dead horse here, which is appropriate given that the Broncos are the other equation, other part of the Brisbane equation. But
classic Ponzi scheme.
But for me, it's got to be New Zealand. I think there's
the first time you mentioned this on the pod,
it
was the first time I'd ever heard anyone propose a second New Zealand team. And I don't remember my reaction. I laughed at you for quite some time. But since that episode, that's become a very regulation suggestion for people, and it actually has a hell of a lot of merit. So I was wrong to laugh at you. Tell us again now why the argument's so strong.
Well, it makes, from a business perspective, it is a lot smarter than Perth for a couple of reasons. One is
intellectually, obviously. Yes. Have you met people from Perth? It's amazing.
I've even been there.
They can't work out why the sun sets over the water.
Anyway, big shout out to Perth. But pretty straightforward. They are a one code town effectively. The AFL is really deeply rooted. The West Coast Eagles are a $250 million organisation. They're massive. You'd have to be poaching all of your players pretty well from the current NRL. Whereas if you go to New Zealand, and fundamentally it gives you an extra time slot and potentially a fraction of a population of 2 million people.
The time slot thing is a great incentive.
Yeah.
I see that as a great incentive. I'm not saying it's the totality of the problem. You don't do it just because of that. But you have to admit that actually works out beautifully.
It's an incentive. I don't know how great it is, though, if the number of people you're going to be drawing in is, basically A-League game levels, because it's going to take a while to build up that audience. So the reason you go to New Zealand is because they have incredible rugby talent infrastructure already through union, and they have an excess of players that they're always bleeding to European Union competitions.
Yeah.
And B, the New Zealand are nowhere near saturation from a rugby league standpoint because they're so incredibly Auckland-centric from an identity standpoint. So giving New Zealand a local derby with a side that is not wedded to the Auckland identity gives them a really interesting local derby that gives the other part of New Zealand that it eventually goes to effectively the ability to show up Auckland, which is what the whole country is always wanting to do.
So essentially you want another team there to siphon off rugby union talent because there's an excess, and as you said, they're bleeding into the English Super, the rugby union comps. So would you call them the Leeches?
No, I'd actually call them the Bulldogs and take Canterbury from Sydney and transplant them. No,
you're always trying to relocate poor old
Canterbury. There are existing identities. There is actually a relatively well-known Canterbury franchise, I think, called the Canterbury Bulls down there that are black and red. You could maybe even bring up some sort of a Bears link. It's a whole range of things. The other thing, of course, it does is it strengthens New Zealand as a whole. It makes tests more interesting, which raises their profile.
Can I tell you this, a personal experience when I was driving around the South Island, which is obviously a rugby union stronghold. I was really surprised at how strong the brand recognition was for the Warriors.
Yeah.
So, it was on in most pubs. Rugby League was on. It wasn't attracting the same crowd as a Super Rugby match was at the time. But that actually showed me that there was a potential audience, even in the South Island, for Rugby League in New Zealand. So are you assuming that it might be set in the South Island, or are you thinking too on the North Island?
From a population standpoint, you probably would argue to put it in Wellington. Some people even argue that they should just put it in the north part of Auckland, but I think that's a mistake.
Yeah.
I like the idea of putting it in Canterbury just because Canterbury's associated with success in New Zealand because of the Crusaders.
Not in Sydney.
No, well, I mean, not now.
Yeah.
But as a region, Christchurch and Canterbury are, they're basically the big dogs of New Zealand rugby. And they have a cultural sort of, a history of success that is not really matched by anything else.
Mario, look, let's take Xander's proposal here as something that would say it gets implemented in 3 or 4 years' time. As a rugby league fan, would you be pumped to see the New Zealand local derby? Would that be something that would draw you in on a Saturday afternoon on Foxtel? You go, I want to check out the Leeches versus the Warriors.
Damn right. I mean, if you think about it, how pumped do we get by a Pacific Island, by Tonga versus Samoa, or even say the Aboriginal All Stars versus the Maori All Stars? It's just seeing these big Islander boys going at each other it's a great spectacle. And not that the New Zealand team would necessarily be all Maori people. I'm sure there'd be a few white guys here and there, but generally speaking, I don't know if passion's the right word, but it does feel like there's more sort of passion when...
I love watching those games. The Samoa-Tonga game's amazing.
Yeah. Whereas you see most white guys like Clemmer or Lodge, beating their chests and throwing their handbags at each other. That just look like posturers to me.
I feel like what you've done there is reverse racism, and yet I love it. I love the fact that you've just painted the picture of just an inferior race of people running hectic at each other. It's not as exciting. You're right. Clemmer does not excite me. Not anymore. I had a weird period in my late 20s where he could arouse an erection from me, but it's been a long time.
So I just don't want to be that guy, but there is no such thing as reverse racism. It's just racism.
I see.
Reverse racism.
It depends what you're reversing.
You're talking about positive discrimination, perhaps.
Yeah, so it depends what you're reversing. It's talking about the reverse of the perception, not of the act of bigotry. So I assume that's where the expression... Look, we're getting bogged down.
Sorry.
We're going to talk about a Ponzi scheme in a second. But something I want to pick up on what Xander said before. I thought it was interesting because he was talking about the lack of merit for a Perth franchise and the fact that it would take a long time to garner interest. Now, I don't know if there's any Perth... In fact, I do know this. There are a couple of people from WA who listen to the podcast who might disagree with that because they do have, in their view, a fairly flourishing domestic league. The participation rates aren't too bad, and they have had a number of players who have played over in that league that have gone on to play first-grade NRL, which is more than you could say for Victoria, for example. I actually think there's more fertile ground in Perth than we give it credit for.
No, I don't disagree with that. I think that there's more there going on than say Volandis publicly says.
Yeah.
I just think that from a next port of call in terms of trying to get quick wins, New Zealand makes more sense. I would be going for New Zealand after Brisbane too. I mean, if I had my way, I wouldn't have a Brisbane 2 at all. I would have New Zealand and Perth.
Yeah,
I'm not.
I like that. I love the double expansion idea of. Maybe New Zealand and Brisbane for me. I do think Brisbane makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes some sense. I just wonder about some parts of it. But I think that to me, Perth is something that you start investing in seriously after you get those two expansion teams, and then you prepare the ground for it. So when it can launch, it's really ready to go.
Mario, what do you think about that? I mean, I'm an expansionist, as you know, which is why I've recently overtaken my neighbour's place and set up a den at the court cases pending. But I like the idea of having two more teams. But how do you think about the counter-argument of thinning out of talent? Xander said before, quite rightly, that the difference between the bottom four teams and the top four teams last year was significant. You'd probably have to argue more significant than it's been in quite a few years. Is adding another two teams just something that's going to accentuate that?
See, I thought you were going to say that your expansionist ideals was a good excuse for your expanding waistline, but obviously not what you were going with.
Well, don't worry, mate. That's well on its way as well.
Look, I think that the difference between the haves and the have-nots, I mean, part of it's just to do with bad coaches and that sort of thing, but a lot of it, there was a lot of injuries. There was a lot of upheaval. It was very hard for teams to maintain a 30-man roster last year, given that there was no reserve grade of any sort. So I just think that all it took was one or two significant injuries to really screw a team over last year. And I think that exacerbated the problem a lot. I don't think it's going to be as big an issue this year, assuming reserve grades go ahead. But I also think you're underestimating there's a lot of decent players over in England that could be playing rugby league here, and offer them the right money and they'll come.
Look, to finish up on this, lads, I wanted to give this little task to both of you because I often want to test the intellectual rigour of the show, and I'm going to start with you, Xander. So prepare yourself. You have become the doyen, if you like. You're not a pundit anymore. You're a doyen of the NRL expansion program, and I've given you a really difficult task of convincing the Australian public or the Rugby League public that the NRL needs to have a new team in Madagascar. You've got 30 seconds. I want you to convince us here on the show and our listeners as to why we need another team next year in Madagascar. Your time starts now.
Well, it's fairly straightforward. We need a new team in Madagascar as a way to experiment with a lot of the crazy new rules. Because, I mean, clearly, as an isolated location halfway across the world, they're only going to be able to play themselves. And therefore, they're going to evolve at a faster rate than the rest of us. They'll be like new rules on steroids. They'll be a perfect way for us to incubate and develop a new game that has none of the challenges that our game has now. It'll be a pure form of rugby league that is inbred to the most incredible degrees.
Okay, and your time stopped. So, Mario, just to interrogate Xander's response there, he's essentially advocating for Madagascar to be, well, what a Tasmania is, an island full of inbreds who will be able to, I guess the Peter Volandis of the world will be able to test new rules over in Madagascar, like your 4-point field goals. See if it goes all right. And if it doesn't go all right, who cares? Because it's just Madagascar.
Oh, I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, obviously, we're assuming that anyone from Madagascar is not as as important or not as intelligent as us, based on that logic. And there's nothing racist about that. I'm definitely not a racist, but is how I'd go with that. So sure, whatever Xander said.
You're a male Karen. I love it. And I'm going to give you your own version as well, Mario. You have 30 seconds, and get ready to interrogate this, Xander. You need to convince the Rugby League public, Mario, to have a new team next year in Easter Island. Your time starts now, sir.
I wanted Madagascar, damn it. Easter Island, it's simply that we have the captain coach ready to go in James Tamo. He's already got his own statues on the island, so let's make that whole team a homage to the great man himself.
Mario raises a really good point there. I've never put two and two together, but James Tarmow looks exactly like the Easter Island statues.
He does a bit. It's a very good point. See, I like the angle you went with there. When he said Easter Island, I was immediately thinking, well, perfect place to put a team to develop a real sort of cutthroat mentality, the type that, would resort to cannibalism if it needed to, because that's
which James Tarmow has obviously done in his time.
That's right, and also what Easter Island is quite famous for.
Yeah, he's consumed several other props in his time. People don't know that. That's why he's so large.
But yeah, it would just give the game a certain edge, having a team that was willing to consume its opposition.
It would be a problem, wouldn't it, to have, I guess, an island team where it didn't have enough space to actually fit a football field. I think Easter Island's quite small, from what I understand. So if you kick the ball, say, out of touch, suddenly it's floating around on the ocean.
It's now Wilson.
Do you think the Islanders knew way back, obviously I assume they're very ancient, I'm going to say BC, that one day there would be a fairly good, just above mediocre forward who'd played a bit of a journeyman named James Tarmow, and they thought, let's start worshipping him now because, in 2,500 years' time, people will moderately like him. More after this.
Jaaarnis, I'm wondering, is the biggest problem for the Dragons the fact that your coach is actually Nathan Buckley in disguise? No brown people need enter here.
Yeah, Murray, I copped a lot of shit the last time I was on this great podcast, and I guess this is my opportunity to apologise for everything I was right about, my reservations with Hook, and you can never suggest that he certainly moved us to the right, just in the way in which he's looking at a particular type of player, a certain look, and he's sort of making sort of decisions, I would say, that Hitler made in 1941. They're not always the right ones.
Hitler didn't make the finals.
Just had a really expansive early campaign and then just trailed off toward the finals.
Yeah, well, he certainly had a final solution.
It's worth noting that when you're climbing a ladder, going to the right isn't going to get you any further up.
Well, look, I put it this way. To answer my state of mind, I've actually changed my Twitter handle. I've now changed it to QAnon. And the reason why I've done this is it's my way of subtly putting a messaging to the Dragons faithful that, look, don't put everything in perspective, buying an aging 31-year-old hooker actually isn't as bad as, a cabal of, global Illuminati forcing children to play AFL. And so I'm trying to put everything into perspective. I'm struggling. I've got to admit, I am struggling.
Jaaarnis, you mentioned McCulloch there, and I just want to know, you forked out the money for McCulloch, but why not just go ahead and pay for a real Army veteran who's had his legs blown off?
Yeah, look, I'd put that in the dumb decision of we've got rid of these decisions don't make sound financial decisions, and they're really bad or obscure footy decisions too. So you're getting rid of Cam McGuinness, our best player. And as Savo Dan on Twitter has pointed out, that we've decided to keep a lock who's currently on trial for indisposed at the moment, and so there's uncertainty there. This is about club culture, and so I don't see any decision we could go there and then just to sort of just thought that the genius of the move was then to put for us to go for an ageing Israel Folau who hasn't played the game for 10 years. My understanding hasn't really ripped up the league in Catalans either. So, yeah, some very strange decisions.
Yeah.
That I think is indicative of the culture of the club at the moment, sadly.
I had a question about that one, Jaaarnis. So was it Folau? It wasn't clear to me. Were they actually seeking him to be a player? Because there were some rumours that they actually wanted him to be the social media manager. Yeah, with the spelling mistakes included. Look, I think I think it sets discuss the poor footballing decisions behind it. But is this really a club? I mean, we've had difficulties amongst the playing group with Jack de Belin.
is this the right club culture that we're having? And you have players like, good old Norman, who, seems to want to pick fights as well during off-season. Now, he may be the victim of it as well, so let's be open to that. But, I think you'd want to keep more Cam McInnes's around rather than giving the lifeline to people who, frankly, it would have been a very difficult position to support that club had Israel continued to push it. And it was never going to go anywhere. It was just a very bizarre decision that the grown-up had to make a decision, i.e. the board, at a late date. I mean, at what point did they decide that was a dumb idea?
So much to unpack here, Jaaarnis, with the Dragons, because I'd say out of the 10 or so decisions pre-season that I'm aware of the club making, I wholeheartedly disagree with all of them. And I'll probably start with, you mentioned Anthony Griffin, but I'm going to start with McInnes. That seems like the most peculiar one because obviously I'm not a Dragons fan, but I would have imagined that he would have been a pretty popular bloke amongst the Dragons faithful, being that kind of like heart and soul player. So when your new coach comes along and says, I'm not sure if that guy who played out of position last year just because he's a great team man, we're just going to ditch him for a guy who's a homophobe and past it. That obviously is going to speak volumes, isn't it, for the coach? I assume Hook is on the nose of the Dragons faithful, right?
Yeah, I think there's still a group that are still willing to give him a bit of a go, and that will probably last a game or two. But I think, the decision around McInnes is a really weird one. It also underlines, I think, a fundamental problem in that our recruitment retention manager, Ian Millwood, has got their, sort of almost... I understand Jonathan Thurston has described him as the worst football mind he's ever come across. And that sort of decision, the conversations with McInnes is apparently that our timing wasn't right in contract negotiations.
Jaaarnis, is that an exact quote from Thurston?
Yeah, if not, I'm ad-libbing, but I'm prepared to go on the record to your listeners.
God, I hope that's true.
Yeah, but put it this way, I mean, Millwood has hardly been successful in the UK, and you look at some of his recruitment decisions. I mean, I understand he was a leading driver behind signing Corey Norman on 800,000.
And Ben Hunt too, right?
Yeah, everyone gives Hunt shit. I got to say, people forget, if he's got a good half in Widdop, when he had a good half in Widdop, he can play.
Yeah.
And I think, okay, he's on a big contract, but at least he tries week in, week out. I'll defend Hunt. Norman just runs sideways and sort of crabs across the field. And to be fair, Norman's that sort of mercurial player who, if it comes off, it looks masterful. But, I don't have a lot of time for Norman. I mean, before we just saw Slio Risto, I think that there is a crop of young players coming through that we have high hopes on. Sullivan, I don't want to put big raps on him, but he's going to be the next immortal playing whilst playing.
You don't want to put big raps on him, but you're going to make him the next immortal. That's two very big extremes.
And he will also invent a new cure for the COVID variant.
Well, true, but the other thing too is you're speaking to a man who's quite happy to sort of storm the capital or Leagues Club and let Peter V'landys actually save us from the AFL. So I'm prepared to believe in anything.
Oh, that's a wonderful metaphor.
Jaaarnis, I did want to touch on Anthony Griffin himself. This is a man who is exceedingly old. He kind of makes Joe Biden look sprightly. And he's recruited a guy called Matthew Elliott. I think he's a contemporary. They've probably got a collective age of about 213 years. And he's also, I understand through some pretty authentic sources, that he might be liking some rather dubious tweets. I know you've alluded to it a few times, but could you illuminate this for the listeners? Anthony Griffin, on his Twitter accounts, what kind of tweets has he liked so far?
Yeah, so I mean, he's been pretty straight down the lace. I mean, picked some pretty mainstream parties like One Nation, support some of their, likes, although that's fallen off the trip. I mean, I think probably the scary thing out of all of it is just the level of media support he's had from News Limited, almost to double down against Channel 9 and Fairfax. And that's fascinating in that I think Webster is probably one of the best journos in the game.
Totally agree.
A Dragon diehard. And, basic questions like following up your previous employer, Penrith Panthers, they didn't even bother to check that. understand why there might be fallouts. Matty Elliott is one, and he's got a good football brain. I don't know about his coaching credentials. I mean, he did well in the Raiders, but that's about it. But then I think there's another. Didn't they get the guy who was from Brisbane, the assistant manager under Seabold, who led the Brisbane Broncos to the wooden spoon?
Well, that does sound about the same pedigree, so I'm assuming they probably have landed him. The holy trinity of death, it's known in coaching circles.
Well, look, the thing is about Matty is that he'll always have a good joke at the end of it. Just to rank home.
The good thing about Matthew Elliott is he has the decency to hang himself with his own necktie when he's not doing well.
Yeah, well, I think maybe he's a bit of into the Michael Hutchins approach to things.
So he enjoys it when he hangs himself, is what you're getting at. He's a bit of a masochist.
Yeah, well, I think you've just described a Dragons fan through and through.
I've always wondered that about you, Jaaarnis, because I always wondered, why do you support the Dragons when you could simply pay a hooker to roast your balls with a candle wax? I mean, I assume you are a masochist.
Yeah, look, I would, but unfortunately, we don't have the third party agreements that Rista fans in being able to get that cash. So, climate carpets, unfortunately, don't provide that level of income stream that City Ford do.
Please tell me Kiama Carpets is an actual sponsor of the Dragons.
Oh, fuck, I'd love it to be. I think we should start a GoFundMe just to get it on there. So, yeah, look, it's not that it's a jet ski company surfing weird down the Gong. So, yeah.
Jaaarnis, thanks so much for joining us, mate. Let's hope that the diabolical situation that is the St George Illawarra Dragons isn't as dire, and somehow Hook and his lovely assistant, Matthew Elliott, when he gets sawn in half and put back together again, so is the Dragons season. But as usual, thank you very much for joining us on the Voluntary Tackle.
It's always a pleasure, boys. I'll deal with you. I'll be more than happy to come on at any time. Cheers, fellas.
Thanks, buddy. Talk to you soon. Bye. We haven't got much time because we're getting very tired. We've run over time. I don't know how this has happened. It's probably because there's a bad host. But we need to quickly talk about, guys, Cameron Smith, because we called it out at the beginning of the show. It'd be really weird if we didn't talk about it. A lot of rumours swirling that he's going to be playing for the Gold Coast Titans. The news in the last couple of weeks has been that he's joined the Gold Coast Golf Club. Now, look, I am no amateur sleuth, as you know. I don't wear the crumpled Mac, for example, or smoke a pipe. But that is a hell of a long way to go to play some golf when you live in Melbourne. Does anyone think that's a bit fishy?
Could be timeshares,
Okay. Just buying the golf course?
Yeah, you got
It's
a
an
timeshare
outlandish
in, I don't really know how timeshares work. It's a little bit like
It's a bit like a Ponzi
it's a
scheme.
little bit like a Ponzi scheme.
I just think that's really lazy reporting by the Telegraph, some proper fake news, because the reality is the Cam Smith who has joined the golf club up in Gold Coast is actually Cam Smith, the golfer, not Cam Smith, the rugby league player. It'd be like if Robbie Farah bought
Really?
if Robbie Farah bought something, bought a villa in Italy, we'd all say, oh, he's opening a schnitzel store in Italy. Oh, wait, it's the tennis player Robbie Farah. My bad.
And on that really, I guess, suspiciously fake news note, we'll end the show. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. And listeners, thank you again. We know it's been a little bit of a break and we did miss you. In between now and then, I have, as I've said before, whittled little pieces of wood into life-size versions of Corey Thompson in that time. And I've quite enjoyed myself. In the coming weeks, we will endeavour to have some previews for the season coming up. We'll probably make it a mega show where we essentially preview every team in about 2 minutes each. That's going to be difficult.
It's going to be a short preview.
I'm going to give a little bit of a foreshadow for a future episode. The Bulldogs going to be big movers this year. And they're going to move faster than Adam Elliott